Scientific or Latin name for the grizzly bear is Ursus arctos horribilis, which actually translates to horrible bear. The taxonomy for the species would be Kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, class Mammalia, order Carnivora, family Ursidae, genus Ursus, and species Ursus arctos. The discovery of the grizzly bear can be traced all the way back to the expedition of Louisiana Purchase conducted by Lewis and Clark. While spending the winter at Fort Mandan, an outpost located in North Dakota, the local people informed Lewis and Clark of a remarkably dangerous animal they called the white bear, which roamed the western United States. At this time, the Mandan people knew very little about the animal, which resulted in them being deeply fearful of it. Despite all the warnings, Lewis and Clark were determined to keep pushing further west into the unexplored territory. The company was certain that the only thing needed to beat the strange animal was a hunter with an appropriate set of skills. Shortly after resuming their journey into the Louisiana Purchase, Lewis and Clark's team had shot their very first grizzly. This bear, however, was rather young and only weighed about 300 pounds. The nearly effortless kill made Lewis quite confident with proceeding farther west. Nevertheless, his confidence was largely reduced once they came across a mature grizzly bear. Lewis described it as a large and terrible-looking animal that weighed between 500 and 600 pounds. Their journal stated that the creature required multiple shots in order for it to be subdued. Additionally, Lewis and Clark claimed the beast was an exceptional swimmer because after it had been shot, it swam a large distance in a river before finally dying. The 8,000 miles long journey completed by Lewis and Clark was what inspired others to pursue their aspirations of exploring the promising Louisiana Purchase. These pioneers undoubtedly had frequent encounters with the bear just like Lewis and Clark did. Ultimately, the bravery of these explorers led to a comprehensive understanding of the grizzly bear species we have today. Grizzly bears have a promiscuous mating system. Promiscuity is when males and females in a population mate with multiple partners and both genders select mates with no distinct pattern. For grizzly bears, this type of reproduction means that cubs can have one mother and multiple fathers. Variable environments and the inability to control areas of land can lead species to adopt this mating system. This type of reproduction is pretty rare in nature because usually it is beneficial for both genders to select their partners. When certain genes get passed on to the offspring, it frequently results in them having a higher fitness. Female grizzlies start producing offspring between the ages of 3 and 8. Their mating season starts in May and concludes in July. The peak occurs sometime around mid-June. Grizzly bears' litter spans from 1 to 4 cubs, 2 being the normal litter size. Between the months of January and February, the cubs are born. Typically, the mother grizzly will remain with her young until they reach the age of 2 or 3. After that, the mother will start the process of creating another litter. Most female grizzlies stop mating at some point in their 20s. A few hundred years ago, around 100,000 grizzlies were estimated to inhabit North America. About 50,000 of those bears were consistently present in the lower 48. As time went on, the populations in Canada and Alaska remained healthy. However, by the middle of the 20th century, less than 1,000 grizzlies existed in the lower 48 states. In order for the animal to successfully hunt and breed, they require immense areas of land. Once westward expansion prompted roads and buildings to be constructed, the grizzly bear's habitat was significantly diminished. This, combined with excessive hunting and trapping, was what led to the species' sudden collapse in the lower 48. In the year 1975, when the species was close to extinction, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service finally categorized the species as threatened with the Endangered Species Act. This placed all grizzly bears located in the continental United States under federal protection. It also made it illegal to harm any of these bears. In addition to making grizzly bears a threatened species, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service established 6 recovery ecosystems, each with a dedicated recovery zone. These zones were intended to aid in the restoration of the grizzly bear populations within the original environment. Though progress has been made thanks to the efforts of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the human presence in the West continues to expand, which is preventing grizzlies from making a full recovery. The majority of grizzly bears can be found in the tundra or in the alpine and subalpine tundra biomes. The bears are also known to inhabit the boreal forest biome. Arctic tundras occur in between coniferous forests and the North Pole. They can be found at extreme elevations like mountaintops, where the temperature is very cold and the land stays frozen all year. Vegetation growth in this biome is mostly restrained because of the severe weather conditions. On the other hand, alpine tundras can happen in any location as long as the elevation is high enough. The land in this biome does not stay frozen all year, but the snow commonly persists throughout the majority of the year. Vegetation growth in this biome mainly consists of small grasses and shrubs. The boreal forest biome, or taiga, basically are coniferous forests that cover the high northern latitudes of the globe. The tundra biome is located north, and the temperate forest biome is found south. Winters in the boreal forest biome are on average pretty long, and the annual precipitation volume is considered medium to high. Vegetation growth in this biome mainly consists of various evergreen trees. In the continental United States, grizzlies once populated the Great Plains, which was a temperate grassland biome. However, this is not the case anymore. Within these biomes, grizzly bears favor a wide variety of habitats mainly because they're so adaptable. Some examples would include woodlands, forests, alpine meadows, prairies, wetlands, mountains, and valleys. Additionally, many grizzlies tend to be drawn towards specific areas where there are either streams or rivers present. This is because salmon make up a significant portion of the grizzly's diet, so they commonly prefer locations near salmon spawning grounds. Grizzly bears do not like humans and evade them whenever possible. This is why the bears have a preference for remote habitats that haven't been disrupted by humans. Long ago, grizzly bears were heavily populated all the way from Mexico to Alaska and from the Mississippi River to the Pacific Ocean. Today, however, their range looks a lot different. Now, grizzly bear communities have been reduced to just areas in Alaska, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, Washington, western Canada, and perhaps southern Colorado. Male grizzlies generally require over 2,000 kilometers of land to roam free in, and the females need about half that. These massive territories are essential for a grizzly's ability to attain a sufficient amount of food and for a suitable den location. This explains why the United States had so few grizzlies. The development of their territories forces them to leave, which results in the grizzlies not having enough land to sustain themselves. Since 98% of the grizzly bear's initial habitat was eliminated, wild grizzly bears are pretty hard to find in the continental United States. Though there has been some improvement in the lower 48 through all the conservation efforts, the amount of grizzly bears still lingers around 1,000 to 1,200. In Alaska and Canada, however, they're actually fairly common because over the years their numbers have remained consistently large. Around 30,000 grizzlies are estimated to currently inhabit Alaska, and about 25,000 live throughout Canada. Grizzlies need extensive sections of land to openly roam in. Without it, the species is incapable of providing for itself. Before European communities were established, there was enough room for thousands of grizzlies in the plains and mountains of the western United States. The abundance of land the bears had did not, however, last that much longer. Some of the worst habitat decay occurred in the U.S. during the 19th and 20th centuries. Throughout this period of time, humans expanded into grizzly bear habitats with total disregard to the effects they are having on them. They constructed things like highways, railroads, dams, and towns. All these components severely reduced and divided the bear's natural habitat. Human interference ultimately led to the grizzlies losing about 1 or 2% of their initial habitat. Even though the Endangered Species Act in 1975 gave them dedicated habitats to help them recover in, bear populations within those ecosystems continue to be completely disconnected from one another, which is threatening their continuation. Today, preserving and expanding grizzly bear habitats, as well as ensuring their stability, is absolutely critical for the bear's ability to acquire its customary range. For humans, this means refraining from generating disturbances like mining, logging, oil and gas drilling, mineral and energy investigations, and land development. Issues are inevitable when human and grizzly territories overlap. So what truly needs to happen is humans need to reduce their presence in the backcountry and allow the bears to reestablish a healthy population in a secure habitat. Grizzly bears are considered to be omnivores and scavengers even though they are in the order Carnivora. This means that they eat a broad mixture of items whenever they come available to them. Humans are also treated as omnivores because of the many things we eat. Some major elements that make up the bear's diet are seeds, berries, roots, grasses, fungi, deer, fish, elk, insects, small rodents, carrion, and even human garbage. Various types of plants compose 90% of a grizzly bear's diet mainly because of their availability. The most popular type of plants eaten by grizzlies are the ones that are in the early stages of growth. This is because they have a high nutritional content. This explains why grizzlies spend almost all of their time feeding on plants. However, plants contain very few calories, so to make up for this, bears do consume assorted types of meat that contain essential proteins and fats. Bears that are not located near the coast typically favor carrion or dead animals, as well as newborn or vulnerable moose, deer, and caribou for their source of meat. Grizzlies located elsewhere usually depend on the spawning of salmon and other types of fish for their supply of meat. Grizzlies typically forage for around 6 to 8 months. Their grazing season starts in late March through May and ends in October or November. Within these months, grizzlies will pick and choose their main food sources based on the current season they're in. Once grizzlies awake from hibernation in late March through May, they are in need of a large amount of food. In order to do this, the bears venture down to elevations where the snow is no longer present. Here they feed on grasses and dandelions because larger shrubs and trees aren't ready to consume yet. Grizzlies also eat various animals like deer and moose that die during the winter. Because so little food is available to the bears during the spring, they can't gain any weight back until summer arrives. As spring transitions into summer, the majority of the snow melts, which allows more vegetation to grow. During the season, grizzly bears continue to search for locations of dense plant life. They usually are found along rivers and streams or wet meadows. Here they feed on roots and other various flowering plants. In summer, bears also consume insects like ants and beetles, which are found in fallen trees. Additionally, grizzlies have been observed feeding on newly born bison, deer, and elk. Towards the end of summer, the bears spend a lot of time getting nourishment from assorted berries like blueberries or huckleberries. These berries contain a large amount of energy. Fall is probably the most significant season for the species. During this period of time, grizzlies need to make sure they're ready for hibernation, which takes place during winter. Grizzlies accomplish this by building up as much fat as they can. Bears living near the coast will usually eat spawning fish. Bears in any other location will still graze on plants and roots as well as dead animals. Grizzlies are forced to resort to these food sources because the colder temperatures cause most berries to die. Once the snow or winter rains begin to fall in November or December, grizzlies will retreat to their dens and start hibernating. Grizzly bears are a key species in various ecosystems around the world. The species is considered to be a predator that lies at the very top of the food chain. This does not, however, indicate that grizzlies only kill large quantities of other animals. The bear's primary function in its habitat is to distribute seeds, supply nutrients, and control prey populations. Grizzlies perform these roles through a variety of methods. The bears actually use their waste to disperse seeds. The seeds eaten by grizzly bears are able to pass through its digestive system without being broken down. Once they leave the bear and its feces, the seeds then sprout into plants. A grizzly's manure also serves as fertilizer for the soil. The manure of a grizzly is able to possess this function because of two aspects. First, while the bear searches for food that's found within the soil, it mixes dirt at the same time. Secondly, after grizzlies digest salmon from spawning streams, they then spread out the salmon carcasses using their own waste. Both of these actions performed by grizzly bears raise nitrogen levels present in the soil. Large amounts of nitrogen in the soil allows for more substantial plant life to exist. Another purpose the grizzly bear has within its environment is that it balances prey populations within an ecosystem. This interaction is known as predation, and it is the main impact grizzlies have on an ecosystem and on other species. Grizzlies prey on herbivores like moose and elk calves. Even though because of their diet they may not seem like it, grizzlies are still large predators that will exploit younger animals because of their accessibility. Experiments conducted in miscellaneous ecosystems have demonstrated that without predators like grizzlies, herbivore numbers have a tendency to increase. When the number of herbivores in an ecosystem grows too large, vegetation quantities are significantly lowered because of overgrazing. Unhealthy plant life in an environment has numerous negative effects on it. Grizzly bear predation doesn't just occur on moose and elk calves. Trout and rodents have also been efficiently preyed upon by grizzly bears. Although grizzly bear populations are considerably limited, they're still able to influence ecosystems through competition. Grizzlies are able to create competition by exhausting and restricting food supplies until other bears are incapable of using them. Competition usually leads to other bears exerting more energy or moving to a different location. Black bears are probably the most eminent species grizzlies have to compete with. Their presence can alter a grizzly's diet and health, though in most cases, grizzlies have a competing edge over black bears. Because of all the vital things grizzly bears do for their ecosystems, they have been identified as a keystone species. Grizzly bears have developed many adaptations, making them suitable for a comprehensive range of environments. A grizzly's diet, teeth, claws, as well as its sleep and hibernation sequence have aided the species a substantial amount with its survival. Because a larger amount of the grizzly bear species live in colder climates, their diets consist of a greater amount of food. The quantity of meat eaten by grizzlies can be predicted by how far north they live. Grizzly bears are omnivores, which means that both plants and meats are part of its food intake. Because of this, grizzlies have specialized teeth that allow it to rip apart meat and grind down assorted types of vegetation. The claws of a grizzly bear probably is one of its most useful features. They help with defending itself against other animals and with searching for food, either in the ground or in trees. Many grizzlies exist in biomes like the Arctic tundra that have very long winters. This causes the volume of available food to decrease a fair amount. To combat this, grizzlies live off of their stored fat, usually for around 4 to 6 months out of the year. This is also called hibernation. Throughout the time in which grizzlies are feeding, their diets change with the season. Depending on what foods are currently accessible to grizzlies, they will swap daytime activity with nighttime activity and vice versa. This species of bear has developed many unique relationships with other organisms that are found in the grizzly's environment. Probably the most well-studied interaction would be the one concerning grizzly bears and gray wolves. These two species have been conflicting with each other for many years. Disagreements between a grizzly and a gray wolf are generally provoked over animal carcasses or in some instances over offspring defense. The most common altercation begins once a grizzly detects a fresh kill, usually an elk, that had been killed by a few gray wolves. Occasionally, gray wolves have been seen attempting to mislead the bear so the remaining can feed on the kill. Grizzlies will then respond by chasing the wolves. If the gray wolves proceed to escalate the situation using violence, the grizzly will typically counter this with several small snaps directed at a wolf's rear legs. Grizzly and gray wolf interactions almost never end in death. Both animals believe that if the risk of death is too great, then it is simply not worth continuing the fight. Most of the time, grizzlies are on the losing side of the interaction when the number of wolves is too great, like at a wolf den. However, the opposite has been witnessed a number of times. This interaction would be classified as competition. Another prevalent interaction grizzlies have with black bears. Though it is rare, grizzlies have been observed wandering into a black bear's territory, often in search of some type of nourishment. Black bears tend to rely more on vegetation for their food, so they're not very competitive with grizzlies when it comes to prey. The conflict regularly arises when food both bear species appreciate, like berries, are situated within a black bear's territory. The differing diet, size, and habitat of these bears are what make this confrontation so uncommon. Grizzlies are nearly always the aggressor in these interactions. Whenever a black bear spots a grizzly, it immediately leaves the location. The only situations in which a black bear will engage a grizzly is if the grizzly is immature or if the black bear is left no other option but to fight. This interaction would also be considered competition. The final interaction worth making note of deals with grizzly bears and cougars. Reports show that cougars take relatively zero chances with grizzly bears. This relationship is unsurprisingly unequal, so is very little competition for the grizzly, as opposed to different predators like other bears or wolves. For the most part, when a grizzly approaches a cougar feeding on its kill, the cougar will quickly flee in order to evade any possible clashes, like predation or competition. However, if the cougar decides it wants to try and defend its kill, the cougar must use its smaller size and claws to its advantage. The cougar's strategy for attacking grizzlies pretty much is composed of harassment while maintaining a safe distance until hopefully the bear gives up. If neither the cougar or the grizzly bear back down, then it basically turns into a fight to the death. This has actually happened multiple times in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Just like the other two, this interaction would be treated as competition. Food chains essentially serve the same purpose as food webs. They both illustrate what organisms eat within an ecosystem and how the energy moves through it. These diagrams both use trophic or consumer levels to group organisms together. The trophic system starts with primary producers. These organisms are autotrophs, which means they're able to generate their own energy through the process of photosynthesis. This process revolves around the energy given off by the sun. Primary producers incorporate organisms like algae and plants. The next trophic level consists of primary consumers. These organisms employ primary producers for their food source. They're considered to be herbivores. This implies that they only consume producers and never other consumers. Deer and cow, as well as zooplankton, can be all classified as primary consumers. Secondary consumers are the trophic level that follows primary consumers. Carnivores and omnivores can be found in this trophic level. Secondary consumers could eat primary consumers as well as producers. Snakes and spiders both are regarded as secondary consumers. The final stage in the trophic system is tertiary or third level consumers. Level 4 also comprises carnivores and omnivores, just like the third level. They may eat secondary consumers or other consumer levels and even producers. These organisms are frequently considered to be top predators in their ecosystems. Humans are one of the best examples of tertiary consumers. A few others would include polar bears and lions. Where grizzly bears fit into all these trophic levels is not very definitive. All grizzly bears are apex predators, so they do not have any actual predators. This allows the species to feed off of separate trophic levels at the same time, meaning that grizzlies will have multiple functions in an ecosystem, not just one. Basically, because grizzly bears are opportunistic omnivores, they cannot be placed into a single consumer level.